Hello, and welcome back to After Dinner Conversation. Short stories for long conversations. So all the things that we do each week, you could do with your friends, right? You read stories, you think about them, you discuss them, you argue over it. Ideally, maybe you have an adult beverage. You try not to end a friendship over it, and at the end of
no promises.
Making no promises. And at the end of the day, you've learned a little bit about yourself and the way you think and why you think what you think, which is really the goal, whatever that may be for you. After Dinner Conversation stories are available on Amazon for download. They're also, you can catch the newer ones on our website, afterdinnerconversation.com. And if you're enjoying this podcast or YouTube video, you can like and subscribe. That would make us very happy. We are at, once again, for our sixth episode. I don't know. We're pretty far in now. 7th episode. A ways. Who knows? We are at La Gattara. And all of these cats are available for adoption. This one in the video.
This is Hemingway.
If you're watching the video, yeah, it's Hemingway with a bow tie.
Hemingway is so cute.
Because pretty much every cat with a bow tie is pretty awesome. And so if you don't want to adopt a cat, but you just want to visit cats, you can also come by, and for like $10, they'll let you just come and hang out. And they do.
It's a lounge, not a cafe.
And they also have special nights where they have yoga and bingo nights and movie nights and all sorts of stuff.
Come hang out with these adorable cats.
So yeah, if you're not ready to commit to a cat, you can just visit a cat. Or you can have a cat who blocks your camera.
Hi.
Like, hey down front. Hey down front. There you go.
There you go.
Okay. So the story, I am Kolby, your host.
Are you going to bleep that out?
I'm going to.
Yes.
I am Kolby, your host.
I'm Jeremy.
And I'm here with co-hosts Jeremy and Jessica.
Hello.
And lots of cats who are hearing us, who are really excited. There's no way that camera's going to stay up there. We'll see how that goes. At any rate, our story today is Are You Him?
By John Sheirer.
By John Sheirer, yeah. And Jessica, you got picked to do the...
Nope.
No,
it's my
Jeremy.
summary.
That's right, Jeremy's got his... Oh my gosh.
This was a long story. So
Jeremy
is amazing at summaries.
Yeah, no,
and
Jeremy
the rest of us are terrible.
Jeremy's setting the bar for the summaries.
Yes.
So if you haven't read the story, ideally you would read the story before you listen to the podcast so you know what we're talking about. But Jeremy has taken it upon himself to give you a little summary of it so that in the event you don't have the time to read it.
You know what we're talking about.
You'll know you can sort of visit anyway and tune in. All right, so Jeremy, go ahead.
All right. So the story opens on our protagonist, Arthur, in the middle of his morning walk to work. After picking up his coffee, the color of which establishes that our protagonist is black, he notices a young woman sitting on a stoop and crying down a side street. Prompted by memories of his own daughter, distressed as a teen, he finds himself moving towards her to offer aid. After a moment of being startled, the woman, realizing that Arthur's not a threat, returns to her sobbing. Arthur addresses the girl, assumes she's a college student, and is probably crying over a romantic breakup. This leads him to several paragraphs of exposition where Arthur provides his own romantic backstory. Arthur married his childhood sweetheart at 18, and after a tour in the Army, he and his wife Donna bought a house down the street from their childhood homes and turned their starter jobs into successful mid-level manager careers, fully establishing that Arthur is not a sexual predator in this scenario of middle-aged man approaches vulnerable young woman. Arthur decides to sit next to the girl on the stoop, belatedly asks for permission when she stiffens, and asks if she's okay or wants to talk, or that he'll just sit with her for a few minutes until she feels better. After a couple minutes of quiet sitting, Arthur notices 2 white men walk by, and that one of them notices the situation. A large black man sitting next to a small white woman in a semi-hidden space. White man continues on, Arthur guessing that their appearance, his, middle-aged and well-dressed, hers, their voluntarily, not in immediate jeopardy, seemed to not alarm him enough to cause a confrontation. Arthur's concerned, though, and mentally goes through possible scenarios of what if he called 911, which takes him through past memories of racial profiling and how times are changing, and that this was happening to him less frequently, and how being a big black guy sometimes had its advantages, but in this scenario
That's
it probably
his quote,
wouldn't.
Right? Big quote unquote
Yes.
big black guy. Yeah, that's the phrase he uses. Yeah.
So this realization prompts Arthur to stand up and prepare to leave. And at this point, the girl has mostly stopped crying and, meeting his eyes, offers that she just received a call telling her that her dad unexpectedly died earlier that morning. She asks if Arthur is her dad, come to sit with her one last time to let her know that everything will be okay. And he says he doesn't know. And then the girl thanks him and asks if he has a daughter, and then tells Arthur that she's lucky to have him. So Arthur and the girl part ways, and Arthur pauses to text his daughter a few essential words that needed to be said right at that moment, feelings that he resolved to express to her more often, and then heads to work.
Good summary.
Thank you.
Good summary. Jessica?
Yes.
What'd you think? You have things that stuck out or jumped out at you that you liked, didn't like?
So I think probably the thing that I liked the most was I felt that I did not expect that the woman who is crying on the stoop for her loss to be her dad. I think the protagonist goes through some scenarios that are related to romantic relationships.
Right, and this is the author of the story really pushing you in this direction.
Right.
Which in very subtle, good ways, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a very soft hand.
Yeah. But I also think it's definitely one that, if we saw somebody crying on a stoop, we would, especially
near college,
a young white girl or a young white woman, we would assume that it is probably a romantic relationship.
Because what else could young white women have to cry about?
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I did love that she asked if he was her dad.
Yeah.
I just very much enjoyed that moment. And I wondered for myself, like it presented in that situation, how would I have answered that? And then I love that he says no, and then he says, I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah.
And I love that because I think it says a little bit about the protagonist in the story and I think it says a little bit about his belief system or,
It mentions that he goes to church.
Right.
That's part of him and his wife go.
And I think that I just enjoyed that part of the story. It was very unexpected. It was a nice, very soft and tender twist for me.
Yeah.
And I think that it's just very pretty. I like that part.
I like the story, how well written the story is, and how well the author brings you back and forth between his internal memories and the events that are actually happening in the story.
Yeah.
That the transitions are really smooth and really well done.
I thought from a writing standpoint, this is probably just technically the best written thing that we've probably read so far. It was just so smooth. It was just so much craft to it.
Right. And how the protagonist is really concerned about all these things and then here you see the girl is completely in a different place.
Mm-hmm.
It's not romantic. She's having this, deep existential problem.
Like these sort of parallel thought processes going on. She's thinking about her dad, and he's having this whole parallel.
Right.
Yeah.
It's really nice.
And I enjoy, I don't think I understand, from a writing background, like especially when I'm critiquing a story or looking at a story, like one of the things that like my first checkbox is how has the narrator changed from the beginning to the end of the story? And if they haven't changed, I have some doubts if it's a short story or if it's a vignette. Right, like if it's just a little snapshot of their life. And I do feel in this that the protagonist does change from the beginning to the end. Like he texts his daughter something that needs to be said. It was not just him being a good Samaritan and he sits down on the stoop and it's like, oh, look how good I was to this morning.
He's having a moment too by the end of it.
He is. Yeah. And I think that's, I forgot Hemingway was here. Sorry.
Because this is the first non-spastic cat we've had. This is the one that you're going to adopt, huh?
Oh, I can't. Cat per square foot. I'm at my max.
Yeah. 2 cats, they're friends. 3 cats, you're a cat lady.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I very much enjoyed that. And I didn't expect it when I started.
Yes,
and the fact that it kind of evolved that way was a very subtle, as Kolby said, a very subtle story.
Yeah, I thought, so for me, I thought it was the strongest craft we've seen in a story yet, which I was really excited about to read. I thought the character, the main guy, Arthur, I thought his views on race, I thought were really complex in a good way, like in a realistic way, which I was really interested to see because he is not sort of the TV nighttime stereotype, right? African American or black man.
Absolutely.
He's a guy who went into the military, who went on a GI Bill, married his high school sweetheart, has probably never really dated, just dated the one girl and married her. He mentions that he's saving up to get his daughter a car as a graduation present. Like, it's just, and yet he still experiences racism, and he understands it, and sort of how he has to take it into account with his interactions with society.
Yeah.
And I think that was interesting. And yet he even says, I inherently think all people are good. I think police officers are generally good with a few bad ones. Right. He's like, I've experienced, driving while black, but I think that's not the case. But yet he also is very much aware of, like, is this person going to call 911 on me?
Right.
Is this person, they're understanding my attire, that I'm dressed in a suit, and so I'm not threatening. And so he very much understands the racist world that he lives in.
Yeah.
And yet doesn't seem to harbor a great deal of animosity about it, which I don't know how authentic that is, but it certainly read in a really intricate way.
It
that
definitely
I really
had
appreciated.
a complex,
Yeah.
It was definitely a complex way.
And it also, I think, made him a really strong character, because you realize that by stopping and talking to this woman, he's not just doing something nice, he's doing something nice at peril. Right?
Yes.
As opposed to, like, if you or I were to stop and talk to someone that was crying, we wouldn't think
we're not at risk in the same way.
Yeah.
Right. Like, am I wearing good enough clothes that the person's not going to think that I'm trying to, like, do something? Am I old enough that I no longer seem threatening, like a quote unquote, big black man? Like, we don't have to sort of take into this large calculation before making the most basic human choice.
Yes. And just to clarify for the podcast listeners that are audio only, we are 3 white people sitting at a table with a bunch of cats.
With a bunch of cats
that
are black and white.
Yeah, they're black and white. But yes, I think the way the story was written, I think it showed the subtle, almost like a internal view of microaggressions and how they shape how you interact with the world on a day-to-day basis, which is probably not something that most people who are not of color would know happens every single day.
Right. And that they deal with every single day.
Right. And
the cumulative effect that might have on just how you interact with the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what makes his character so sort of angelic in a way, is that he's aware of all of it, but somehow refuses to internalize it in the way that you would expect a person would, just out of, just because that's the way it goes. One of the things that I also thought, it reminded me of another story that I'd read, where there's just a small part of a story where a black man and a white man are walking in the South together, and a white woman comes out of a bar drunk, and she's really, like, fall down drunk, and she starts talking to everybody, and the black man immediately crosses the street, and the white guy chases after him. He's like, "Why'd you do that?" And he's like, "Well, black guy, white woman," and this was in the 1960s when the story takes place. "If she falls on me, if something happens to her, like,
absolutely all his fault.
It's
it doesn't
on
matter
me.
What it was.
Yeah.
So I need to remove myself from that situation." And the white character's response is, "That was pretty fast thinking," and the black character's response is, "It's just habit. I've been black all my life."
Right.
Like, it's not fast thinking. It's internalized
ingrained.
instinct. Right. And
ingrained behavior.
And I thought, it's ingrained behavior. And I thought this was a really good story to show how all of those microaggressions and how all those ways get internalized, and how just without even thinking about it, you're figuring that stuff out.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and then the mental paths that it pushes him down.
Right.
Where previously in the first part of the story, he's really thinking about his daughter in all of this, and what possibilities of what this woman is going through. And then as soon as there's this brief moment with the people that walk by, the whole tone of the story changes, and now he's thinking about the potential situation that he's in.
Yes.
And it's immediate.
It's immediate.
Right, because he's been doing it his whole life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I in the writing, one of the things that I really enjoyed is when the white dudes walk by and how he's like, it's hardly it's a microsecond in their stride,
Yeah.
right? Like it's this pause that I don't remember the phrasing that the writer used, but I've seen that moment, right? You've seen that moment
where somebody's doing a flash assessment of the situation.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as a woman, like if I walked by that alley, I absolutely would do the same. Flash assessment. Woman sitting on a step in an alley with another man.
Right.
What's going on? She looks in distress, potentially.
Right. She's in distress.
Is she safe?
Is she safe? Do I need to, make eye contact? Right. There's, and I think for women, there's a lot of things that happen in that microsecond. So yeah, I think it's a really good internalization of that society.
I'll tell you the conversation I wanted to have after reading it, and I think it's because it's a character that's so three-dimensional. I feel like I could talk to the person. I really wanted to have like a long conversation about like, why aren't you angrier? Why aren't you like, how is it this doesn't bother you? Yeah. How is it? And he talks in one of the parts. He talks about, I see people that kneel for the football players that kneel for the national anthem, and I don't do it, but I understand why they do.
Right.
And it's like, of course you understand it. Like, it's not like you're immune. You're seeing all of these things and you're describing all of these experiences you have, and yet you're not kneeling. And I'm like, why aren't you? And not that I'm judging the person. Like, everyone makes their own choices, but I feel like
I'm just wondering what is it that's making him make this choice?
Yeah, what is it? I could comfortably have an hour conversation with this guy about how he's come to all of these conclusions when other people come to different conclusions, right? About he even mentions that it's easier to go to the mall with a white friend because you don't get followed around as much.
By security, right.
You don't get followed by security. And you're like, that's, how do you, I don't know.
Well, and I think it goes back to perhaps this contributes to our greater discussion of a deeper conversation about the story is, taking this story and then turning it to people that we don't necessarily understand why they react the way they do. It's very easy, very easy to judge people by the actions, kneeling or not, standing for the Pledge of Allegiance or not, signing up for the military or not, right? Whatever. Yeah. And to have that discussion and be like, I grew up in a very poor part of the United States. I know Jeremy did as well. And I know that lots of people signed up for military service to get out of it, but there were a lot of us that didn't. And
a lot of people that stayed,
and a lot of people who stayed in that poor area. And, my gut instinct is, oh my God, get out. Why haven't you gotten out?
Yeah.
But there's lots of things that contribute to that in that person's internal dialogue of how they deal with the world. And I think this is a glimpse into something that we don't experience so that we can maybe grow a little bit of empathy. But then to try to take that and grow a little empathy where there isn't a story.
So I think you, Jeremy, I'm pretty sure you know this, but I don't know if Jessica does. So obviously I was in the Peace Corps and I was in Mozambique. And literally the directions to my house, the way they were given to people, was drive down the EN1, which is the only freeway, the only main paved road, until you get to kilometer marker like 137. Pull over to the side of the road, wait till you see somebody, and then ask them where the white guy lives. Because I lived back in the bush, and so you couldn't really find my house. There weren't you can't be like, hey, take these dirt paths.
There's no GPS at the time.
Yeah, there's no GPS at the time.
None of the streets have names.
And so literally you would just get off the public transportation at this, because you just flag them down and tell them where you want to get off. Kilometer marker 137, where's the white guy live? And everyone knows where the white guy lives because I'm the only white guy in this African village. And I also have a clear memory of, I think it was like Malungo, I don't even know if it's a derogatory term. That was just what everyone called me. Like the white guy, like right? Or when I lived in China, we were always, it translated a foreigner, but it literally meant outsider was the way, and people would be like, oh yeah, the whatever, outsider, right. outsider. And I just remember thinking every day forever, huh? Like you get this every day. And the main thing I took away from it, and then I'll stop my little thing, is I was amazed in some ways, and I'm not saying this is similar to the American experience or not, how quickly I forgot I looked different. Because I was surrounded by nothing but Africans. Like not African Americans, Africans, right? Day in and day out, month after month, years. And then like I'd be walking down the street and I'd see a white guy and I'd be like, hey, check out the white guy. And my friend would be like, you're the white guy. And I'm like, oh my God, you're right. I totally forgot. I totally forgot I'm the white guy. Just because like I would see it and I'd be like, yeah, this is where I am. Right.
Right.
Well, and I think that also speaks to an experience where, and I'm making an assumption here, but considering your role there, is that, the white guy was not derogatory.
No,
right?
and it was not there wasn't a racial bias about it. I had a very privileged spot. That is very true.
And you don't...
And television shows didn't show how I rob everybody and blah, blah, blah.
And so you got to operate in this idea of, I got to forget about my race because everybody loved me.
Right. It's like having a British accent in America.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Like
right. You can be a serial killer. I'll still have a crush on you
because you got a British accent, right?
Right. So I think it's a little bit.
That's a great point. I did not have a similar experience.
Yeah,
you're right.
But I think you would have remembered that you were white if every day you were made to think like, oh, you're white and you're different, and that's a bad thing. You would remember that, and then when that white guy walked down the street, your response would have been like,
yeah,
I fear for that white guy,
right?
As a white guy, and also. Is that a bad thing?
Yeah.
Right.
Oddly enough, the guys who had it hardest, and we'll get back to the story, is actually not the white Americans in Mozambique. It was the African Americans in Mozambique because they were lighter skinned, and so the Africans were like, "What's up with the lighter skin?" And the white people were like, "You're a black guy.
Right.
We have already got all these prejudices."
Right.
And so, it was.
And that does speak to a lot of the biracial experience in America.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Did it bother, going back to the story, did either of you pause or did you have any questions about the assumptions that he was making about her? Like he talks about like, what could a white girl possibly have a problem about? Only a boy. Right. And he's wrong. Like
he is wrong.
His prejudice, I guess you could say, for lack of a better term, about what her issues are entirely not correct.
His experience with white privilege.
Right.
And
that they couldn't have anything to worry about, but
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And although I will say it's not harmful.
No.
Right. Like
it wasn't a negative stereotype.
Right. It's just a stereotype. I also find it, it's one of those things as a woman, I always notice when the word girl is substituted for woman. Right. Like in the discussion questions at the end, it discusses, about the girl. And I was like, she's not a girl. She's a woman. Mm. It was very well established by the end of the story that she was old enough to be called a woman.
Yeah.
But it is this, it is something that happens with women all the time is that we are called girls, and I do it myself. It's a society thing. Yeah. But it is a very interesting, like it then makes the assumption everything is not negated, but lessened.
Your problems can't be complicated if you're a girl.
Correct.
Yeah, and that is absolutely not true for any in the story or in life.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, and I think I did that in the synopsis too. It was called her a woman as opposed to a girl at some point.
Yes, you did. I noticed it.
That's why you still are sitting at the table.
Yes, I didn't correct you.
Didn't get clobbered.
Yeah. But I mean, it's something that I think is part of that whole stereotype that you're alluding to is like
there's other stereotypes going on here, not just the stereotypes against him.
Right. But in general, that's not to say that what's that word? Infantilizing.
Gosh.
Infantilizing women does have negative consequences. But yes. I will say that it is, I think when we nobody wins in who has it worse race, right? But I think that it is a stereotype that he came in with, but he also didn't act on that stereotype, and I don't know. It's I think all part of recognizing bias, right?
What do you think? So one of the things she asks him is the title of the thing is "Are you him?" Or I think she says, "Are you my father?" as an angel,
right?
Which the implication is, "Are you an angel?" Right?
Right.
First of all, I thought that was a great title for the story, but I also thought it asked, in a way, it asked an interesting question. Of course, not literally. He's not literally her father come back from the dead,
right?
But in the sense of, is he a kind of angel? Like I was kind of like, ish. Like I felt very ish about that. Like I was like, yeah, in a way, you kind of are her dad.
Exactly, and you are this visiting angel to do exactly what she needed at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It
wouldn't have served the story, but it would have been great if he'd been like, yeah.
Right.
By the way, the cure for blindness and $1 million are buried under the house. Start digging.
Yeah.
Then just gets up and walks away.
Well, and I thought like in that idea where I was trying to like how would I answer? Like,
oh yeah.
My first thought was like, would I have just said yes? Like this woman needs it. Like she needs it to be yes.
Yeah.
She needs her father to come and sit with her. But then it's super awkward next time they meet in a coffee shop.
Right.
Like, no, not right now. Not your dad. Right.
Like right now, I'm just putting air in my tires. I'm shopping for underwear. I don't need to have this moment.
So I think it was a perfect answer for him to say like, no, I
don't think so.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think that's beautiful because it does. I mean, because maybe he doesn't know. Like maybe we see that he comes from a religious background. Perhaps he believes that he was sent here to sit on a stoop for a reason.
And it talks about his religious background. Yeah. I was a little jealous of his family. This is not necessarily related to our questions. Like he is the most perfect dad. Like I was like. And if I had any complaint at all about the story, and this is like low level complaint.
Sure.
He is a flawless human being.
Well, so I wonder, did the author do that specifically so that white people reading it would not be thrown off?
Well, they wouldn't look for like bait of like, oh, he's got other motivation or he's Yeah.
Right.
Possibly.
Like I worry that, I mean, not that I worry that the author did this, but I worry that white readers would be thrown off by it, and therefore
even by the fact that she mentioned that she was pretty,
right? Or had his background been that he dated a ton, or was divorced, or had a bad relationship with his daughter.
Suddenly, there's these other motivations that are potentially
even if the entire story had happened the same way. When he got up and left, you're like, I bet I know it is real. Like you start wondering.
Yeah. And I worry that is, what I'm trying to say is that is it necessary that we can only, as white readers, we can only read flawless black characters? And if that's the case, gosh, we have a
lot of work to do.
Go.
So much work to do.
Yeah.
Because that's real sad. Like we definitely would have not taken a second glance if it was a white dude that was, sitting on a stoop with her and was divorced, and we
right. And how would the story have been if his thoughts are
presidential elections much?
No.
Let me just
How would the story have read if while he's having these thoughts of sitting next to her, their thoughts of how do I hit on her?
Right.
And then
would have played into every stereotype of everything that ever would have.
What would the difference is, if this had been a white guy and this is what he's thinking, white middle-aged guy.
Right.
Yes, there are all these other stereotypes, but how would that have affected this ending?
Yeah.
Where that's not why she thought he was there.
Yeah. Totally. And even if another interesting question to ask about this, all this internal dialogue that happens, all this internal backstory that happens, she never is privy to. But how would, as a reader, had he been thinking about when he can ask her out,
right?
And then she and nothing else happens in the story externally. How would we, as a reader, walked away from that story? It had been a much different.
Well, and also, I think it would have been a different experience also if we had gotten the entire story from her perspective instead of his perspective. Because one of the things that makes this character flawless is as he's interacting with her, we're getting the flashbacks of the soccer practice and the military experience and the married year's sweetheart and everything. So we know his perfect intent, and she does not.
Correct.
Right? She just knows she's having a bad day and a guy comes and hangs out. Yeah. And so from her perspective, it would have been, we as readers maybe would have superimposed, because of our own biases, ill intent that by seeing it from his perspective, we know is not there.
Right.
Actually, that's a good point.
And I also think about, like, does she think he's an angel because dude's coming and sitting next to her?
Morgan Freeman. Because Morgan Freeman always plays God, and so, of course, if some angel's going to come, he's got to look like Morgan Freeman.
I was going to say some dude that just doesn't hit on you suddenly is an angel. Right. Like, that's the bar. It's so low.
The bar is so low.
Wow.
Just saying.
Yeah.
We have a long way to go.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things, though, that you're right. I didn't think about this as I was reading it necessarily, but I think your comments, Jessica, make a lot of sense to me in that I think this story shows that by the way it has to be written, it shows that there's still so much more work. Because I think as a white reader, I think you would be more forgiving of some mixed motivations that good can still come of from a white character.
Well, this definitely was something I identify as LGBT. And one of the things that definitely happened in the LGBT community with writing in the last decade was there was this big movement of LGBT readers who said, for the love of God, can we get not the perfect gay person, right? Can we get a villain that's evil, but somehow is not evil just because they're gay?
Right.
Like, just evil because they're evil.
You can be gay and evil and have them be unrelated.
Right,
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And I thought it was such a good comment. And we have seen literature evolve, especially speculative fiction, evolve since then to fill that void. But it was a void that people were like, we only get Morgan Freeman as God.
Right, that's it.
That's it. And we only got, gay people who were the best friend, the very effeminate best friend, but could not
The
be
supportive, non-threatening male character.
correct. And that was all we were getting. And so now we're getting a more nuanced evolution of literature through that. And I think that's good. I think that shows that we're moving in the right direction.
That it's becoming a characteristic as opposed to a trait. Like a defining trait.
Right. Or a motive, for that matter.
Right.
Like, it was definitely motive.
What's the TV show that I kept insisting on you watching?
Euphoria.
Euphoria,
On
yeah.
HBO.
Where one of the main characters
Is,
trans or transitioning?
Transitioning.
Yeah, and it has nothing, it has a little bit, but it is not the motivating character. It's not the motivating issue.
It's a characteristic,
You're
but
right.
it is not a defining characteristic for the character in this scenario.
It's just like if she had blonde hair, it doesn't matter in the thing.
It was, I was telling Kolby this on the way in, is the reboot of the Gem and the Holograms comic book is frickin' phenomenal.
I'm gonna have to read it or watch it now, whatever.
Read it.
Okay.
There's no show. But
Yet.
I haven't
TV
seen Evil Dead 2 yet.
So, but there are gay characters and there are trans characters in Gem and the Holograms reboot, and literally just doesn't really come up.
It's not the point of their character.
There's like one that's not. It's definitely not the point of their character. There's like one point where the woman tells the rest of the group that, by the way, I'm trans because you're putting me on stage and this may come out in like press.
Yeah.
And they were like, okay. And that was it. And she was like relieved. And there was definitely a plot line there, but in general, it was not the point of the story, which is always,
where you want to see things go.
That's where you want to see things go.
Yeah.
Some realism in our writing.
Yes.
Yeah. So you've been listening to After Dinner Conversation, short stories for long conversations. This podcast, as well as all the other ones, are available on iTunes, iPodcast, I guess. iPodcast is what's it called now?
Google Play.
What's it called now? No, because they changed iTunes to like iPodcast or
Wherever you get your
wherever
podcast.
you get your podcast. Also on YouTube. All of the short stories are available on Amazon. You can also get some of the newer ones that haven't been released as ebooks yet on afterdinnerconversation.com.
Hey, Kolby.
Yes, ma'am.
What if I was a writer and wanted to write a story for After Dinner Conversation?
So if you were a writer and you wanted to write a story for After Dinner Conversation, first I would advise you to proofread your story before sending it in.
Because Kolby can't read. I really have to read everything to him over the phone.
We get a lot of not final products, I would say. But
Okay.
assuming you've proofread it and assuming that you've asked yourself, is this sort of a literary version?
Thought-provoking.
Yeah, is it the literary version of the trolley problem? Then the short story version of the trolley problem, which, by the way, nobody's sent in yet, but I bet it'll happen.
It'll happen.
Now
Now it will. Then please do send it in, because that would be amazing. We get a lot of them already. We probably get 3 to 5 a day that are submitted now.
That's great.
But if we got 5 to 7 a day submitted, I would not be disappointed.
Okay.
Particularly if any of those additional ones were good, or amazing, or phenomenal, or like as good as this one. I mean, if we got 5 to 7 RU hymns a day, I would not be sad.
So where do you submit?
You go to our website,
Okay.
afterdinnerconversation.com. Yeah, we actually
I
just
think that was the question.
Yeah.
Oh,
where's the submission guidelines?
yeah, the submission guidelines are on the website as well.
all right.
And if you're part of
Thanks, Jeremy.
if you're part of Duotrope or
Duotrope,
or what's the other one?
Submittable.
Submittable or Submission Grinder.
Submission Grinder is another one,
which is a weird name for a submission thing.
Hey.
We actually just finished a little while ago our writing competition.
Oh.
And in a couple
is
of
the
weeks,
contest coming? Yeah.
in a couple of weeks we'll do that
All right.
story as well. And that person, by the way, that's the other cool thing about submitting is like, what do writers want? They want their story to be not just
Absolutely.
read, but
Talked about.
discussed. And what better way than be like, yeah, we're going to discuss your story for a half an hour with cats. It's a pretty.
A cat named Hemingway.
It's really that pretty much sells itself.
I agree.
So next week we have Leon, 3 outcast witches visit the hippie era to tempt a street musician. And it's definitely sort of flavors of Macbeth, which I think.
Some genre going on here.
And
some speculative fiction.
Yeah, and are you
Very
gonna
excited.
have a long paragraph like Jeremy to discuss it? Okay. Okay. Well, hopefully Hemingway will not be adopted yet, and he'll still be here for us next time we're back.
Yeah, I hope so.
Thank you for joining us. Bye.
Bye.